says there. Mind you, Will Self's been writing about Tim as a kind of awful name, and so maybe they've changed the thinking of that. Yeah, it's something like, Attila being called Attila, but without the sort of power and fear that inspires. So, anyway, call me Tim, call me Tom. That's okay by me. Now, I'm a senior lecturer here at Coventry University in creative writing, and I'd just like to introduce my guest. Now, here we have Mary Ward Lowry, who's, is that the right pronunciation?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Like
Who's,
Lowry, but without the
yeah. She's a BBC producer. She's worked on features, dramas. She says she works regularly with animals and children. So she's obviously very brave. She's worked with playwrights like Mike Walker, Hattie Naylor, Steve May, Sarah Daniels, and introduced Helen Cross, of course. Seems to be like you work quite a lot together, actually, yeah. And John Godber, Julie Blackburn. And you're currently working on a dramatisation of The Emperor's Bay. Is that right? Yeah, by Bernardine Hackberry. Come on in. Okay, so that's Mary. I'm sure she'll say something about herself in a little while. We've got Nick Walker here, who's a Perrier-nominated writer, founded Birds, a Coventry-based theatre company. Works down at the Belgrades, also worked with lots of other theatre companies, Stan's Cafe, Insomniac, Starling Beaches, etc., etc. Now, he's written for radio, first King of Mars with Peter Capaldi, starred in that one, and he's also a director of Top Dog, an independent radio company. He's done many other things, written novels, etc., etc. I can't really go into the extent of all the things you've done. And he's currently working on a new drama series for BBC One. Now, Helen Cross is also a multi-talented writer who goes where angels fear to tread, I believe. She's written novels, short stories, screenplays, radio drama. Her first novel, Summer of Love, was made into a film. Picked up a BAFTA, I believe. And she's currently working on a film adaptation of your latest novel, Spilt Milk, Black Coffee. So there's plenty of novels to be read here. She's worked on many radio dramas, including with Mary. The documentary drama Blue Eyed Boy about father. She also wrote Tolkien in Love, another radio drama. And I mean, these have a documentary element, so if you're interested in documentary, Helen is a person to ask. And your latest is Rowena the Wonderful. And Mary's also working on that. So I'd like to welcome all of you, as well as our guests. Don't feel suffocated by the weight of the baggage of all their achievements. We're all struggling from the darkness to the light, or in this case maybe with radio drama back into the darkness, and so feel free to chip in and ask your questions and so on. Finally, we're going to arrange this a little bit like question time, so I'm going to ask questions and then I'll invite our panel to answer them. So I'll be a kind of second-rate David Dimbleby. And with that, let's start. So I'm going to just ask Nick first. What makes radio drama different from other forms of drama?
Well, it's all about the voice, for one thing, or it's about the audio experience. My route into radio had been through theatre, and I'd always found that it was the dialogue and the very text-heavy plays that I used to quite like writing that found a natural form for radio. I suppose there are two things I want to say about it. One is that the circumstances under which people listen to radio are slightly different to the circumstances under which people watch theatre or maybe read a novel or maybe watch television to some extent. People listen to the radio while driving the car or washing up or in the rain, getting up in the morning, whatever it is, and it can be a kind of background medium, and I've always found that quite interesting for those times when you puncture through that. So there are those occasions where people talk to you about how they were driving along and they had an appointment to go to, but they stayed in the car to listen to the end of the story until they got out, and it always felt like a sense in which you should aim for the concentration of maybe a theatre experience where people are pretty much locked in, and you have direct control over how people not only see it but hear it to some extent, or you can rely on that a little bit, and then being able to, moment by moment, I think, give people a continued reason to listen in a concentrated way to your radio work. So I think it varies for different radio writers, but for me anyway, it was always about the quality of the story and the dialogue between some interesting and engaging characters. I also found it quite a liberating thing because certainly having worked a lot in TV on terrible soap operas, that there's no restriction either to where you go in radio. It's just as expensive to set something in Coventry as it is to set something in Hong Kong, or you can zip around to Los Angeles, or you can put it in a war zone, or to some extent it can sound immensely epic and high. The budget's no real object in that way. You can just build the sounds yourself. So the scope of the imagination is enormous. So there is the possibility for huge stories if you want them, as well as very intimate stories which people might be listening to, and it's just a little two-handed or something. So I found that writing for radio, distinct from perhaps some other forms, was that on the one hand it's very liberating. On the other hand, I always felt like I needed to give people a reason to listen to, which made me less lazy in the writing. So it's a tremendous form. One thing I find, just to add, I find quite interesting about radio is that it's actually not that much of an expensive art form to make. The budgets for an afternoon play, it'd be very difficult to fund a theatre production on, for example.
Can I add something there? Because in my department, I work in Bristol, and we have 38 staff, and we produce nearly 950 programmes a year, and we do it for the same budget as one episode of David Attenborough's fantastic natural history programme, Africa, that you've all been watching lately. One episode, we do 936 programmes, so, it's cheap.
Cheap and you can go to the moon.
It is cheap, and they commission, and said it's one of the largest commissioners of new writing really in the country, radio. And what's interesting about it is that more people will listen to one afternoon play on the radio than will go and see all the plays at the National during the course of the year. So the audiences are really huge, and so it feels like you have access to a large number of people. There's a certain sense in which you don't know what many of them think about it. You're a bit distant from your audience, because certainly now that the message boards have gone from the BBC, and by radio drama, I think we're talking about Radio 4 here a little bit, there are other places to get audio work out, of course. You can seize the means of production yourself, and there are a whole range of ways of making audio work that can go out in other formats.
Okay, I'll have to piss on those. Stop you. I'll be rude to all my guests. Helen, do you want to add anything now, or Mary?
I'll just very quickly say that for me, what I'm probably primarily a novelist, and what I like about writing novels is the emphasis on character. And I think what radio can do quite uniquely is really take you into the head of a character in the way that film doesn't do that. That's not the remit of television, it's not the remit of film, it's not really the remit of poetry, but radio sort of crosses those boundaries between poetry and novel writing. You completely be in the character's head. The first radio play I wrote was, following on from what Nick was saying there about being able to go anywhere, I wrote a radio play about the aviator Amy Johnson, who was the first woman to fly around the world. Now, I could never have got the budget to do that as a film, because we had a crashing on cannibal-infested islands, and there was scenes in the desert, there were scenes all over the world that you could do anywhere in radio. So I like the scope of it, the imaginative scope of being able to be anywhere, any time period, any location, but also the sort of sense of interiority of being in a character's mind.
Okay, Mary, do you want to add to that? But also ask my second question. Maybe you can say something about both. So what's the key to engaging the audience and keeping them listening?
Well, I think well, I come from a documentary background actually, so that's one of the reasons Helen and I get on so well, I think, working together. And I think it's always about authenticity. So it doesn't matter if you go to the moon, but you don't really, it doesn't feel like, you've got to have a credible world that you're portraying. I always love one of my favourite films, Toy Story, because I always think, those toys really, their world is so real, and you really believe that it all matters, and you see everything from a very, very distinctive perspective, and you can really do that in radio and make it credible, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's. I mean, I did a play with John Godber. Actually, we don't call plays on radio anymore. We call drama. The new language, yes. And it was all from the perspective of an unborn baby. So the baby was kind of exploring the world she was about to be born into. And I just can't imagine being able to do that in any other medium, really, and for it to be believable. And so that's one. I mean, one of the other things I think is, this is true for anything you write probably, is that you have to have heroes. You have to have, you don't necessarily have to like them, but you have to want to be with them for some reason. They have to engage you for some reason. So heroes are very, very keen on heroes, and just things that you really care about. And it doesn't matter what that world is, if you know about it and care about it, that will come across, I think.
Helen,
How do you engage the radio?
Yeah, how do you keep them listening when there's all those other distractions, possible?
Well, that is, it's the compelling nature of story. If you are telling a good story, people will want to know what happens next. And, for some writers, that's just sort of a gift. I think it's for just any people, isn't it? Some people will come back on holiday and go, oh, you're never going to believe what happened at the airport. And you go, you want to know. And other people go, yeah, it's all right, it's okay. Shouldn't really have gone to Portugal, but, so it's just the ability to keep someone engaged to the story.
Only write the good bits. Don't write the boring bits. Sometimes you feel you have to write the boring bits. You can write them if you want, but then cut them. Because I spend most of my time cutting things. I have to get I look at a script and think, right, well, that's going to go, that's going to go, that's going to go. If it can cut, it will cut. So you've got to do that. You've got to do that too. You've got to cut. Make it matter. Make every single word matter. Make every single word move the story on as well. I think that's, it's got to be the story in microcosm.
Have you got anything to add, Nick, about engaging?
The more good bits closer together. I mean, that was the note. I remember that was John Finnemore. I think it was when we were doing a comedy show with him. There was a crisis in the room when there was the read-through, and there was a certain sense of what do we do, and the rule was more good bits closer together. And it was the same thing about cutting out the boring bits. But I think to some extent that's the crossover into sort of feel like these are good points once you've got the commission. To some extent, but maybe the same points carry over into exciting the producer who will give you that opportunity to make this play in the first place. So I think the same principle holds, which is that before you can engage the audience with all these things, you also need to be able to engage the person the commissioner who will allow you to actually do that. And to some extent, being able to communicate what that story is quite quickly and economically before it's written is as much a principle as when you write the thing, I think.
Helen looked a bit, a slight pained expression there. Were you not agreeing with that?
Well, no, I think, I don't know if I necessarily think about engaging the commissioner. I think it's obviously really important you do that. But you will sort of, as a writer, you'll sort of have your story, whatever that story is. And often you'll have a story, you'll think, no one really will want to do this. Like Newborn Baby. Yeah. Someone might have thought, I was going to be interested in a newborn baby, but of course you were. Yeah. So actually, it's that awkward thing of following your heart, however bizarre that idea is, and making that what's leading, really.
Well, you'd have had to flog it, though, wouldn't you?
I flogged it. I think Helen is right about dialogue being poetic. For me, I often work with poets who who are really good writers of dialogue, and I think it's because dialogue is so straightforward. It's so wriggly, and people never really say what they mean, and they say things which are bizarre. You know, if you kind of dropped in on the conversation, you wouldn't understand it. But when you're sort of in the play and in the world, you do understand it. And I think that's something really important to remember. Don't, you know, if someone asks a question in a play and it gets answered, I think,
Yeah, I just wonder about, I mean, that brings me on to my next question, but which is about what makes a good radio drama script, and conversely, what should a writer avoid doing? But I think, you know, good dialogue, I see this in you know, when I read scripts, that, you know, if somebody says what they mean, and the next person answers honestly, then this is totally artificial dialogue, because of course we don't say what we mean, and we don't answer honestly, do we? Or it would be rather unusual. So, can you tell us about the qualities of a good script? I don't know who wants to start.
I don't know. I mean, for me, I think what you're trying to do is write subtext in dialogue, really. You're not writing the text, you're not writing what's on the top, you're writing what's underneath. There's always something going on underneath. That's what you're trying to do. You're writing what's underneath the story. Maybe even what the characters don't know they're saying.
yeah.
So the writer knows what the characters are saying before they do.
And I think it's really important, and this is slightly off what you're asking, it's really important to know what the text is. You don't necessarily write that. You write that in your pitch, and what we have to do, what we've all, I'm sure, done, and I know Helen has, is to write a pitch to sell the programme. And that, for me, for Radio 4, we write you have to write 100 words of plot and 200 words of treatment. And the kind of balance of the numbers tells you that the treatment is much more important than the plot. You know, the plot is, and it's a really painful thing to do when you're really excited about all the detail of the story, and you want to get it all in there, and you want to sort of, you know, really get across the quality of it. If you can condense it down to 100 words, and maybe even to a sentence, even to sort of 10 words, so that you can express what that play is about, that drama is about, I think that'll help you. That helps you to know what you're doing. You know, it helps you in the bigger picture.
Okay. I mean, I know you kind of act as a, you know, a wall for people with scripts to stop them, you know, getting over the wall into production in a sense. I mean, do you do that?
No. Well, there,
I mean, but what should a writer avoid doing? What are the scripts that you throw away immediately?
Well, I don't really work like that.
No, you don't work like that. Okay.
But can I just talk a little bit about the Writers' Room, the website that the BBC has, which is you're probably all very familiar with it. So, but it is really worth looking at it, because you know, you can tell from the numbers that I was talking about earlier. Most producers don't have time to read unsolicited scripts. We just don't have the time, because we've got so much else. You can send them, you know, and you know, you might hear something, a play on the radio or a documentary even or something, and you hear the producer's name and you think, I love that, the approach to that piece of work, and you can email the producer. I mean, I don't tell anyone I told you this, but you email the producer and say, look, I really love the thing you've just done. This is why. This is what I want to do. You know, how about it? You could try that approach, but the official way of doing things is to send your script into the Writers' Room, and they have, I think 3 times a year, they have a sort of window of opportunity when you can send the script in, and they will read it. They will read the first 10 pages, so you have to make sure they're good. And there's a window at the moment. I think it's closed on the 28th of March. So you're very welcome to do that. And I think the next one is going to be autumn. I don't think we're doing one in the summer this year. But there's also a lot of really good advice and absolutely essential advice about how to lay out the script. Because, you know, obviously how should it look, how it should look, and it has everything. In fact, I brought one of the things that they have, just the layout of the script that you can have a quick look at. It might be useful to you. And they also on the Writers' Room website, there are opportunities for other kinds of competitions and things that you can enter, you know, a film or other things with BBC and other writing opportunities as well. So it's worth having a look.
Certainly, that's one of the in-house routes, isn't it? And the other one is to go through an independent production company. So I think it's about half the output. I think it is, maybe slightly less, is made by independent production companies who have a slightly different. Well, each company probably has their own processes, but whenever you hear a play, you might hear at the credits at the end, that was a peer production for BBC Radio 4. That means that peer productions have made the show and delivered it to BBC. And it might be that peer productions, they might have a completely different way of getting writers, which might be that they do like reading scripts and they can cherry pick from that, or that they do like meeting you, or that they want to talk to you about ideas. And my own company has a sort of mixed things. Don't necessarily read scripts, because like I say, the process isn't necessarily that. It's more that a writer comes with an idea, and with the producer you work up that idea, then it gets commissioned, and then they write the script. So it's usually that way round. But it's certainly useful to know that the writer can write beforehand by seeing a script in that way. But it feels that there are probably some different ways that you could engage with Radio 4 anyway, through independence, than you might through in-house, and it's whatever suits you really.
Yeah. And you got anything to add on, things to avoid in writing, what you consider bad writing?
I think on the whole, what we find is that there's lots of really great dialogue that comes to us, but people tend to fall down a bit on structure. So structuring their plays feels like it's a bit of a craft thing to learn, and plotting it well and having your plots which all work together, if that's the kind of work that you're making, and being in control of that and detonating the things at the right time and marshalling all those sorts of structural things feels like that's quite a skill really. I mean, there's sparky dialogue that can ramble on indefinitely, doesn't amount to anything, but if you can organise it and you can think about structure and plot, then that's what I look for anyway.
I think it probably,
Go ahead, yeah.
I think it probably also helps to understand a little bit about how a drama is made for radio, and the sort of technicalities of it a little bit. So, simple things like the person who's closest to the mic is the one that we're kind of most involved with, or hourly, that's the word. And so, that, there are funny tricks for doing that, but you can make, you can play around with the sound quite a lot, and it's worth learning about those techniques so that you can write them into your play.
Is that what you do? Then you would write the sound effects into your script?
I would expect the writer to do that too, because it's their vision, and they need to. The producer has once the script is delivered and signed off, the producer then takes it on and makes it into the drama, and so the producer might well have a different idea about the kinds of sounds and how to actually record it and how to structure how to technically make it work, what music to use and those kinds of things. But I think it's really important for the writer to have a vision, and if you've got a very clear idea that I'm just done a drama with Eynhallow, and it was with Prunella Scales, and she had this character who loved Supertramp, and she wrote this whole monologue to go with a Supertramp track, and it was just fantastic. It worked exactly with the music, and she wrote it so that it would work with the music, and it just was perfect. And it was so funny and well, I thought it was anyway. I don't know what you think you've heard it. But and that's a really accomplished thing to do, and a wonderful thing to be able to do if you've got that kind of technical mastery. It's really worth thinking about.
Okay, just at this point, I've got a couple more questions to ask our guests, but does anyone from the audience want to ask anything or chip in anything at this point? Or take up something that people have been saying? Feel free. Yeah.
For the BBC writers' room, because they've got it's open now for submission. Should you send something that's not specifically that you haven't specifically written for radio or?
Well, I think they're looking for. You should look at the website because it's got a lot of frequently asked questions and information about what they're looking for and what not to do. But they're looking for talent rather than necessarily to So they're looking for the evidence that you can write, not necessarily that this is the idea that they're going to, turn into the next afternoon drama.
Right.
So, and it's not just radio either. It's other that they might sort of develop it for other avenues on the BBC as well. I think what happens is they bring all of the scripts get read for those 10 pages, and then they will shortlist a few writers who will then get some opportunities to develop their work and their thinking and get some exposure to technicalities of it and how things are done, and perhaps a bit of feedback on the script as well and how it might be developed. So I don't think it's necessarily a problem, but I always think whatever you're writing, it's worth knowing what the plot is. It's worth. If you want to write for radio, for example, you need to listen to radio. You need to listen to the stuff that's going on, because I think people often are a bit behind in the way they're thinking about what they've heard. Maybe they were listening. Maybe they've heard things from 5 years ago or 10 years ago, and they have this idea that that's not quite in keeping with what's happening now, what the network's trying to do. There's Radio 3 as well, so as Nick said, there's lots of other places you can.
Any other questions at this point?
Sorry, can I just ask, when you said about writing, like technically, if you want the voice near the mic, would a writer put in near the mic? Or
You might do.
how would they?
It depends how important it is. Yes.
You might put intimately.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Because it's almost right.
It's not a
So you're
technical
writing
language.
really.
No.
It's not like saying close up on a CU on a film script.
I
or
think
something
you
like
think
that,
more
yeah.
about the audience
Yeah.
experience. So how are the audience going to hear that?
Yeah.
And they're going to hear it as a very intimate moment between that character and the.
I mean, it's a kind of question the producers tend to pick up, isn't it, when they've had the script, which is about whose story is this?
Yeah.
So who is the mic going to be following around to some extent? And some of these production things do get fleshed out over the course of drafts, but it's interesting to sort of demonstrate that you've thought through. Well, I suppose it is an awareness of the form, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's a kind of experience of the form which feels really reassuring.
I mean, often the producer will do all of that for you because they understand it probably much better than you might. But if you can think about it, it just makes it better. I think. It means you have more control, more creative control.
I'd just like to ask Helen first. Can you tell us something about the commissioning process? Mary said a little, but how you connect with producers as a writer.
Well, I mean, the really nice thing about Went Free, the best thing, because I think the producers who work in radio are the nicest producers. And I don't just say it because they're sitting here. But in film, it's quite a ruthless, horrible world, really. TV is quite a ruthless, horrible world. People's with ruthless, horrible people. But the nice thing about radio is the people who work in radio, genuinely nice people you want to work with. So the people that I've worked with, there tends to be a pool of people who one kind of stays in touch with. They might send me an email and say there's a commissioning round coming up, have you got any ideas? Generally you haven't at that point, until you realise there's a commissioning round coming up, so you think, better have some ideas. And also certain things some people wouldn't be interested in, like Mary, as she was saying, does more documentary or documentary dramas. So if I've got a stray idea for a modern play, it's probably not going to be Mary's thing. So it's more knowing what commissioners and producers are into, whereas I know other producers that I've worked with who like really contemporary drama, hard-hitting modern stories. So if you have an idea for that might suit that person. So it's really, again, unfortunately, it's about listening to lots of radio, knowing what those people do, people you've worked with before, and then having your ideas and knowing who they might go to. I mean, I think there's only like pretty much one commissioning round a year, isn't there, really?
Well, there used to be two.
There used to be two,
now
but
it's
now,
really one.
at the moment, they're doing all the plays for 2014. But there are the little slots that come up, but
So it's very much
2014,
in advance.
15, but it's pretty much now, by the end of March, that those commissions will be made. And there will be other little slots happening.
Yeah.
So you've got to have your ideas in advance. And I make notes of ideas that I have. I have little ideas, and I make a good radio play, and I remember it. And then I forget about it probably until someone says, have you got any ideas? Because it's the commissioning thing. And I might put in more than one idea with a different producer. But I'd tell them, I'd say, I'm putting in another idea with this producer. They'd say, well, that usually seems to be fine. You can put in 3 or 4 ideas with different producers. You're unlikely to get all of them anyway.
Yeah, and there are also the other. I mean, there's the comedy slots as well. So sort of sitcoms, for example, for radio, which they come up a bit more regularly. They're commissioned slightly differently too, but and often 15-minute ideas as well, which feel a bit more manageable, especially if you're kind of the emerging stage. But yeah, and ideas like, well, how about sitcom based on a barge? Let's have it as like a family who lives on a barge, something like that. How about that?
Yeah.
And an idea of that sort might go in with the writer and a bit of an idea, and it might then get developed from that point on. So there's sorts, but also, comedy tends to draw on different ways of. The comedy producer at the BBC does a lot of going and scouting for talent at Edinburgh, for example. So one of the ways she buys lots of her comedy is seeing live work. Quite a lot of drama is produced, which is about borrowing writers from theatre, maybe, or documentary makers, or whatever it is. So it's probably unlikely that there are huge numbers of pure radio writers, if you like. There are some, but often, if you are getting your work out in other forms, that's one route into radio. My route into radio was through live work and also novels. It came through two different strands, but I hadn't written for radio before. Producers had seen those works. So I think in terms of the commissioning process, even though there are some specific deadlines that the BBC organises so that they can hit, so that it goes through the system, the kind of commissioning is sort of happening weirdly all the time. Producers are out there looking for writers. They're seeing work. They go to the theatre. They're watching things. People send them a YouTube link of something they've made, and so to some extent, it's sort of an ongoing thing.
And I think you can make the commissioning process sort of work for you a bit. At first, I used to think, this is so horrible for the writer because you have this wonderful idea, and then you do your 100 words on that idea and they turn it all down. Yeah. Or even worse, you do your 100 words, they say, we love this idea is going to be, it's marvellous. Then another 6 months pass or something, you do now 400 words or something on it, and they don't like it anymore. And then there's nowhere really else for a radio script to go. That's a bit of a problem if it's only a radio idea. It's hard for it to go anywhere else but on the radio. However, if you think of that slightly differently, and you start thinking, actually, this is a process to help me, so I don't have to write the whole thing. If they're going to tell me after 100 words, oh, actually, we're doing 3 plays about that this year. That's actually quite helpful to not have to write the whole thing. So think of the way that it is commissioned as there to help you rather than to hinder you, and then that suddenly becomes quite liberating. So, and then by the time you do your 200 words, you're still thinking it as quite a fluid and flexible process. Rather than, at first I think I used to think, I've got it all in my head, it's going to be marvellous, and now they don't want it. So it was a process of rejection rather than a process of sort of enabling, which I think a bit more like now.
Just one last question, because Nick switched on to different genre in terms of comedy. What about documentaries, Mary? How are they different from drama?
Well, actually, I mean, I think in lots of ways they're the same. I mean, the skills you need are the same, really, because it's about telling stories and making it exciting and also, I mean, I really like documentaries where people are talking about something, but they really mean something else. There's a subtext, so it's the same thing. That's what's exciting. That's what I like in documentaries as well. But I mean, if you're interested in working on documentaries, we don't have writers for documentaries. We have presenters, so you have to be expert in whatever that means. You have to be the right person to present that documentary. You have to have credibility. So if you're the person that knows more about that than anyone else, then you're the right person to do it. And that may be something very personal to you, so that it may, you don't necessarily have to be a kind of world genius.
Helen wrote about father, didn't you?
Yeah, well, that was a drama documentary. And at Bristol, we do a lot of drama documentaries, and they're, a sort of very, very flexible and fluid kind of stock pot, isn't it? And we put lots of things into it and stir them all around, and it's not necessarily a great chunks of text or
By
dialogue.
presenter, you don't mean someone who's actually going to do the voiceover? Or
Yeah, well,
whatever.
no,
Do you?
I
Yeah.
produce straight documentaries as well, so I do mean that actually. But there's no reason why you couldn't have a presenter in a documentary drama. I don't see why not. You could. In fact, we did. We were in it.
Okay.
Is it worth talking about the
haven't got much time before we get on. I mean, we probably won't have time, but I mean, I'd like to see if people have got some questions. What would you like to ask of these, wonderful, talented people in the industry while they're here? You've got about 3 minutes to ask them something, so make the most of it. Anyone got anything? Yeah.
Are there any preferences in terms of content for radio? I listen to a lot of the afternoon dramas, and there does seem to be a lot of variation. But I wonder if there are certain areas that Radio 4 tend to be interested in.
I think the important thing is that it's got to be relevant for now. So Jeremy Howe, the commissioning editor of drama, always says, beware the rustle of the crinoline. Because people often they always think, oh, Radio 4 is very serious. It's got to do something about the first woman to, cross the Sahara with a donkey. I don't know. It's just, whatever the story is, you've got to make it feel as though it matters now, for whatever reason that is. And he's very keen on politics and current affairs, that kind of thing. So if you've got something that sort of spins in with a bit of an edge of an issue, then that's nice. But
Are there taboo areas? I mean, or taboo language and things like that? I mean,
there's some compliance issues, but I mean, it's sort of obvious ones really. And every I think actually, because it's on the website now, the commissioning guidelines are published now, aren't they? So they are available for people to look at. So on the whole, a sense of, in this round, we're looking for this sort of thing. We're definitely not looking for this kind of thing at the moment. So at Olympic year, they've done all their Olympic commissioning. I think this time round for 14-15, because there's a big push on the anniversary of the First World War, for example. You avoid the First World War. So there are things like that which...
medical dramas, police, crime, probably not. They do a lot of that. And what else? They've just done the George Orwell season. Anything. You just. I mean, they do put these in their commissioning guidelines.
But then again, the rules are always broken
Yes,
all the
they
time.
are, they
Because
are.
a few weeks ago, I heard one brilliant play about heroin addict. Next time I tuned in, 2 days later, another brilliant play about heroin addict. It was always like the same play.
Yeah,
I thought this is supposed never to happen. Neither is, abject misery, which both of them were.
Yeah.
And they were good at
Yes,
misery.
they were. Yeah.
They were brilliant misery,
Yeah.
but they were totally misery.
Mm.
It was often Radio 4 say, don't do misery, don't do just drugs or
You
cancer.
find that change you off a bit of misery.
Yeah, other people's misery makes me very happy.
And
That
anything
Sharon
agricultural,
Friday,
we have
isn't
to
it?
watch out for the archers, because the archers are just before, and the archers is the, you cannot touch the archers.
Yeah, it's tough to do farms, I think. I've
Well,
never got a farm,
farmers,
I've never got a farm thing away. But I suppose the other thing is that I've also never got away a first-time writer who hasn't done at least something. I suppose that's the other thing, in that I'm not sure if you have.
I have, actually.
Oh, there you go. That's
Yeah.
great, because I was worried that there was a slight sense in which it's really, really accessible to get into. I've never managed to get a first-time writer away.
It's hard. It's very, very hard.
Just now, we're running out of time. One last question, anyone, or should we
I
wind?
kind of wanted to expand on what you were saying there about first-time writers. How difficult it is to get them to say more about that.
Is
The
it a
afternoon
clique?
drama. No, it's not that it's a clique. It's just that you've got to know what you're doing, and you've got to have something really special. I think that's the thing. But the afternoon drama slot is the place when they will accept new writers. Maybe not from the MCs, because our unit in Bristol is quite small. Our access to those slots is quite small. But if you go through the writers' room, the afternoon drama slot is the place where they will, in theory, allow new writers in if the idea is good enough, the writing is good enough.
But if that's the one place, I suppose it's worth bearing in mind that that's where all the new writers are going to. So, I mean, I suppose it's about demonstrating that you can do it, either on a script that you sent to a producer or in some other form.
Yeah.
So that somewhere you've demonstrated that you can do it.
Yeah.
And with that, I'm afraid we'll have to wind up because we're running out of time. So just like to thank all my guests in the usual way. And thank you all for coming. You might have to rush down to Allenbury or wherever you're going now. Okay.
Very silly.